I stepped into that glass boardroom at 7:45 on a Tuesday morning, carrying 18 years of blood, sweat, and corporate survival in my leather briefcase. Air smelled of burnt espresso and the metallic stench of panic that always precedes a $3 billion merger. Then the boss's 27-year-old daughter adjusted her neon jumpsuit, looked at my tailored gray suit, and told me I was completely underdressed. She had a freshly bought business degree, a vocal fry that could peel paint off a wall, and a daddy who owned the company. I was the chief financial architect, the fixer who cleaned up every legal mess they ever made. But according to her, I was just there to handle the boring stuff while she brought the energy. I simply lowered my voice, looked her dead in the eyes, and reminded her that the investor coming through that door cared about our balance sheet, not her fashion choices. The junior analysts in the corner huddled together in sheer terror because they knew what was coming. They knew I was the one holding the shovel every time this company tried to bury a disaster. But they also knew that in modern corporate culture, bloodlines usually crush competence every single day of the week. My refusal to shrink back made the air in the room turn dangerously cold. Just then, our CEO, Richard, walked in looking like a retired country club golfer who had spent 40 years failing upward. He immediately gushed over his daughter's look and told me to keep my actual financial data hidden under the table so we wouldn't bore our guest. He wanted to sell a grand dream, completely ignoring that my hard data was the only reason we were not currently being investigated by federal auditors. I tightened my grip on my pen until my knuckles turned pure white. I tried to warn him that Daniel Gray, the sovereign fund manager who was about to walk through those doors, devoured fluff for breakfast and tore weak companies to shreds. But Richard just patted my shoulder and told me to be a team player. That phrase is always just corporate code for sit down, shut up, and take the blame when everything goes wrong. Right at 8 o'clock sharp, the heavy doors opened and Daniel Gray stepped inside. The man did not operate on human time. He operated on absolute time. He was a compact, razor-sharp predator in a tailored navy suit with eyes like cracked ice. Behind him trailed two terrified young associates who looked like they were expecting an immediate execution. The CEO's daughter leaped out of her seat like a cartoon character, rattling her designer bracelets while throwing out nonsense buzzwords about paradigms and energy. Gray barely touched her hand, giving her a look that would freeze boiling water. He sat down, opened a single notebook, and stated that he had exactly 90 minutes to discuss debt ratios, liquidity, and actual market numbers. His cold gaze slid right past the CEO, ignored the trembling staff, and locked onto me. He did not see a pushy woman in a plain suit. He recognized a fellow predator who actually understood the numbers. But before I could speak, the daughter dimmed the lights and launched into a shiny presentation about social media trends and brand love. When Gray cut her off and dryly pointed out that sentimentality is not a real financial metric, her confident smile completely dissolved. He demanded to know our customer acquisition costs for this new campaign, and she stood there frozen like a deer in headlights. The room went dead silent as she stuttered, desperately hoping the answer would somehow appear on the wall. I did not scream or raise my voice. I simply stated the exact figures, proving that her shiny new project was losing money hand over foot while burning through our most loyal customers. The daughter gasped in horror, while the CEO looked like he wanted to jump across the table and strangle me. But Gray just turned his chair away from them and looked directly at me. He asked me why our customer drop-off rate was so dangerously high. This was my moment of ultimate choice. I could have played nice, blamed the economy, and protected the family dynamic like a good little employee. Instead, I looked at the daughter's arrogant sneer and decided I was done playing the silent victim. I told the absolute truth. I explained that we had gutted our research and development budget by 15% just to fund her useless social media influencers, resulting in cheap products that customers hated. The CEO gasped for air, but Gray just took notes and demanded that I continue. For the first time in her pampered life, the boss's daughter realized she was not the main character in the room. Panicking, the CEO called for an immediate 10-minute break to try and control the damage. He grabbed his daughter and dragged her into the side kitchen, where I could hear them furiously whispering like raccoons fighting in a dumpster. I stayed right where I was, carefully aligning my papers while the rest of the room treated me like a ghost. Gray stood up, buttoned his jacket, and calmly asked me to walk him to the elevator bank. As we walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway, he asked me how long this circus had been running. I told him I had built this financial framework over 18 years, but the family had let the daughter take over 3 months ago to chase clout. He looked at me with cold understanding and asked why an absolute expert would stay and let an amateur insult her. I looked at my reflection in the glass, seeing a battle-tested professional who had carried this entire company on her back. I told him I stayed because I was the structural beam holding the entire roof up, even if they treated me like cheap furniture. A slow, dangerous smile crossed his face. He admitted that he was ready to pull his money, but he wanted to see if I was willing to let the daughter destroy herself completely. He told me that if I took control of the narrative and proved there was an actual adult in the room, he might still consider saving the business. He stepped into the elevator, leaving me standing in the hall with my heart pounding like a war drum. It was not fear anymore, it was pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I walked back toward the boardroom, listening to the daughter throw a temper tantrum inside the kitchen, calling me a glorified secretary with a calculator. I pushed the heavy doors open with a sharp, confident smile and asked them if they were ready for the next round. The daughter glared at me and demanded that I stay silent, but I simply sat down and opened my master folder to the legal risk department. When Gray returned, he bypassed all the flashy slides and asked her directly about our corporate governance and internal oversight. She proudly declared that her uncle headed our internal audit committee, completely unaware that having a family dentist oversee a multi-billion-dollar fund was an absolute legal disaster. I quietly slid my official governance reform packet across the heavy mahogany table. It was the exact blueprint I had drawn up 2 years ago, which the CEO had hidden to keep his family on the payroll. Gray picked up the folder, read the immediate conflict of interest risks, and openly mocked the idea of a dentist managing financial compliance. The daughter panicked, accusing me of sabotaging the deal by bringing up negative facts, but Gray shut her down instantly. He told her flat out that I was the only person keeping them from being sued into oblivion. Unable to handle the humiliation of being publicly educated in her own boardroom, the daughter made a pathetic excuse about checking on catering and stormed out on her high heels. With a dead weight finally out of the room, I spent the next 20 minutes leading a flawless deep dive into our corporate debt, asset backing, and capital distribution. When she finally returned with a tray of sandwiches no one asked for, my phone buzzed on the polished wood. It was an explicit text from the CEO threatening to terminate my employment on Monday if I said one more word about our internal failures. He was genuinely willing to collapse a $3 billion deal just to protect his child's ego. I looked up and caught the eye of Gray's lead analyst, who gave me a subtle, knowing nod of pure respect. I looked at my phone, thought about my decades of loyalty, and realized I owed these corporate parasites nothing. Gray turned to the room and asked about the source code for our upcoming flagship software platform. The daughter immediately jumped in, spouting nonsense about artificial intelligence and future technology that did not actually exist. When Gray pushed harder, asking who was actually building the platform, she began frantically making up answers about high-level outsourced teams. I set my phone face down, looked Gray straight in the eye, and delivered the final blow. I revealed that we did not own a single line of proprietary code, and that the entire platform was lazily rented from an overseas vendor that could shut us down at any moment. The CEO slammed his hands on the table and ordered me to clear out my office immediately, but Gray's voice cut through the air like a steel blade, commanding him to sit back down. Gray looked at the broken executive team, then turned to me with total respect, recognizing who held the real power in the building. He made it crystal clear that without me, their company was nothing more than an empty shell built on fragile ego and borrowed time. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is simply stepping back and letting toxic people shatter their own illusion.